Queen Lysandra woke up every morning knowing she was the most powerful person in the kingdom of Valdris. Her mirror showed her a beautiful face, her advisors told her she was brilliant, and her army followed her every command without question. Life was perfect, or so she thought. The queen had ruled for 7 years, and in all that time, no one had ever dared to challenge her authority. Her court was filled with people who agreed with everything she said. When she spoke, everyone listened. When she walked into a room, everyone bowed. This was the way things had always been, and she believed this was how things should always be. Sir Gareth, her most trusted warrior, had never lost a single fight. He was tall, strong, and completely loyal to the queen. Whenever someone caused trouble in the kingdom, Sir Gareth would handle it quickly and efficiently. The queen felt secure, knowing that her champion could defeat anyone who dared to oppose her. But everything changed on a sunny Tuesday morning when Prince Aldrich arrived from the neighboring kingdom of Thornwick. Unlike other visiting princes, who came with gifts and flowery speeches, Prince Aldrich came with different ideas. He had traveled to Valdris to discuss trade agreements between their kingdoms. But his approach was unlike anything the queen had experienced before. During their first meeting in the royal chamber, Prince Aldrich did something shocking. He sat down before the queen gave him permission. When she raised her eyebrow in surprise, he simply smiled and said, "I hope you don't mind, Your Majesty. It's been a long journey, and I thought we could have a more comfortable conversation this way." The queen's advisors gasped quietly, but she decided to let it pass. After all, he was a guest, and perhaps customs were different in Thornwick. However, as the conversation continued, Prince Aldrich did something even more surprising. He questioned her trade policies. "Your Majesty, I've noticed that your kingdom taxes merchants quite heavily when they cross your borders," he said in a respectful but confident tone. "Have you considered that lowering these taxes might actually bring in more money? When merchants can afford to bring more goods through your kingdom, you might collect more total revenue, even with lower rates." The queen felt her cheeks burn. With embarrassment, no one had ever suggested that her policies might be improved. She had always been told that her decisions were perfect. Her advisors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react to this bold suggestion. "Prince Aldrich," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I have ruled this kingdom successfully for 7 years. My policies have brought prosperity to my people." "Of course, Your Majesty," Prince Aldrich replied with a warm smile. "I can see that your kingdom is indeed prosperous. I was simply sharing what has worked well in Thornwick. Sometimes different approaches can complement each other beautifully." The queen didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to anyone treating her suggestions as just one option among many. In her kingdom, her word was law, and her ideas were always the best ideas. This prince seemed to view her as an equal, which was both confusing and irritating. Over the next few days, Prince Aldrich continued to behave in ways that surprised the queen. He spoke directly to servants, thanking them for their service. He asked questions about the kingdom's history and seemed genuinely interested in learning about their culture. Most shocking of all, he offered his own insights and suggestions during court meetings, as if he had every right to participate in governing decisions. The final straw came during the grand feast held in Prince Aldrich's honor, according to tradition. All visiting nobles were expected to participate in a ceremony where they would kneel before the queen and publicly acknowledge her superiority. This ceremony was the queen's favorite part of hosting foreign dignitaries because it reminded everyone present of her power and authority. When the time came for the ceremony, Prince Aldrich stood up slowly and looked directly at the queen. The entire court held its breath, waiting to see him kneel, as so many others had done before. Instead, he bowed politely from the waist and said, "Your Majesty, I have great respect for you and your kingdom. However, as a prince of Thornwick, I must respectfully decline to kneel. I hope you understand that this is not meant as disrespect, but rather as a recognition that we are equals in our royal standing." The silence in the great hall was deafening. Queen Lysandra felt as if the world had stopped spinning. In 7 years of rule, no one had ever refused to kneel before her. Her face turned red with anger and humiliation as she realized that her entire court was watching this unprecedented moment. Her pride, which had been growing stronger over the years, suddenly felt like a wounded animal. It had been publicly challenged, and her authority had been questioned in front of everyone who mattered in her kingdom. The whispers and shocked expressions of her courtiers made her feel smaller than she had ever felt before. That night, Queen Lysandra couldn't sleep. She paced back and forth in her chambers, her mind racing with anger and embarrassment. How dare this prince treat her as if she were just another ruler? How dare he suggest that her policies needed improvement? How dare he refuse to show her the respect she deserved? By morning, she had decided that Prince Aldrich needed to be taught a lesson. She would show him, and everyone else, that she was not to be treated lightly. She would prove that challenging Queen Lysandra was a mistake. That would have serious consequences. The queen called for Sir Gareth early the next morning. Her champion arrived quickly, still wearing his training armor from his morning exercises. She looked at him with determination in her eyes and said, "Sir Gareth, I need you to teach our guests some manners." She explained her plan carefully. Prince Aldrich would be challenged to single combat against Sir Gareth. If the prince lost, he would have to publicly acknowledge her superiority and serve her kingdom for 1 full year. If he somehow managed to win, she would grant him any reasonable requests he might make. The queen smiled coldly as she spoke. She knew that Sir Gareth had never been defeated in combat. The prince might be confident with words, but swords were a different matter entirely. By the end of the day, Prince Aldrich would be humbled, and her authority would be restored completely. Sir Gareth nodded respectfully and prepared to issue the challenge. Queen Lysandra felt her confidence returning as she imagined the look on Prince Aldrich's face when he realized he had pushed the wrong queen too far. The sun rose bright and clear on the morning of what Queen Lysandra believed would be her greatest triumph. She had barely slept, but not because she was worried. Instead, she was excited. Today, Prince Aldrich would finally learn his place, and her entire kingdom would witness her power restored. The castle's great courtyard had been transformed overnight. Servants had set up rows of wooden benches for the nobles and important citizens who would witness the combat. A large circle had been marked in the dirt where the fight would take place. At the far end, workers had positioned the queen's golden throne on a raised platform, ensuring she would have the best view of her champion's victory. Queen Lysandra, dressed carefully in her finest royal robes, deep blue silk decorated with golden threads that caught the morning light. She wore her most impressive crown, the one with sapphires that matched her eyes. Every detail was planned to remind everyone present of her authority and power. Today, she would look like the queen she truly was. By mid-morning, the courtyard was packed with people. Nobles whispered excitedly among themselves, many placing quiet bets on how quickly Sir Gareth would defeat the foreign prince. Servants and guards crowded along the walls, grateful for this rare entertainment. Everyone seemed to understand that they were about to witness something special. Sir Gareth appeared first, and the crowd cheered loudly. He looked magnificent in his polished armor, every piece perfectly fitted and gleaming in the sunlight. Famous sword hung at his side, the blade that had never tasted defeat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone who had won every battle he had ever fought. The queen watched her champion with pride. Sir Gareth had served her faithfully for 5 years, and in all that time, no one had even come close to matching his skills. Foreign knights had come from distant kingdoms specifically to challenge him, and all had left defeated and embarrassed. Today would be no different. When Prince Aldrich entered the courtyard, a strange silence fell over the crowd. He wasn't what anyone expected to see. While Sir Gareth wore impressive steel armor decorated with the royal colors, Prince Aldrich appeared in simple brown leather armor that looked well used but not particularly special. His sword was ordinary, the kind any decent fighter might carry, and his shield bore no fancy decorations. The queen almost felt sorry for him. Almost he looked so ordinary compared to her magnificent champion that the outcome seemed even more certain than before. She settled back in her throne, preparing to enjoy every moment of what was about to happen. Sir Gareth stepped forward and bowed respectfully to the queen before turning to face his opponent. "Prince Aldrich of Thornwick," he announced in his deep, commanding voice. "You have insulted our queen and shown disrespect to our kingdom. Prepare to face the consequences of your actions." Prince Aldrich nodded calmly and drew his sword. "I accept your challenge, Sir Gareth. May the best fighter win, and may this settle the matter between our kingdoms honorably." The queen raised her hand, and the courtyard fell completely silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. She lowered her hand quickly, and the battle began. Sir Gareth attacked immediately, his sword flashing in the sunlight as he launched into his signature aggressive style. His blade moved in wide, powerful arcs designed to overwhelm opponents quickly. The crowd gasped as sparks flew from the clash of steel against steel. This was the Sir Gareth they all knew and feared. But something unexpected happened. Instead of being driven back by the fierce attack, Prince Aldrich moved like water, flowing around each strike with surprising grace. He didn't try to match Sir Gareth's power directly. Instead, he used quick, precise movements to avoid the worst of each attack while delivering small, careful strikes of his own. The queen frowned slightly. This wasn't going exactly as she had expected. Sir Gareth's opponents usually crumbled under his initial assault, but Prince Aldrich seemed almost relaxed as he defended himself. Still, she wasn't worried. Sir Gareth was just getting started. As the fight continued, the crowd began to murmur with uncertainty. Sir Gareth was clearly the stronger fighter, his sword strikes powerful enough to dent shields and break weapons. But Prince Aldrich's strange fighting style was proving more effective than anyone had anticipated. He moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough for Sir Gareth to pin him down. More troubling was what the queen began to notice about her champion. Sir Gareth was breathing harder now, sweat running down his face, despite the cool morning air. His attacks, while still powerful, were becoming slightly slower and less precise. Meanwhile, Prince Aldrich seemed to be getting more comfortable, his movements becoming smoother and more confident. The queen felt a small knot of worry forming in her stomach. This was taking much longer than expected. "We're usually quick and decisive, but they had been fighting for nearly 20 minutes now, and neither man had gained a clear advantage." Then something changed. Prince Aldrich suddenly stopped moving defensively and began to press forward. His attacks weren't as powerful as Sir Gareth's, but they were incredibly precise, finding tiny gaps in the armor and slowly wearing down his opponent. The crowd watched in amazement as the prince's sword work became a lesson in perfect technique. Sir Gareth, now visibly tired, made a desperate attempt to end the fight quickly. He raised his sword high above his head for a massive downward strike that would have ended the battle instantly if it had connected. But Prince Aldrich was ready. He stepped smoothly to the side, letting the heavy sword crash harmlessly into the dirt, then moved forward with lightning speed. The queen gasped as she watched Prince Aldrich's sword find its mark, sliding between the plates of Sir Gareth's armor to rest against his throat. Her champion, the man who had never lost a single fight, was on his knees with his opponent's blade at his neck. The courtyard was completely silent, except for Sir Gareth's heavy breathing. Prince Aldrich stood calmly, his sword steady but not pressing hard enough to cause harm. He looked directly at the queen, his eyes showing no triumph or cruelty, only quiet determination. "Do you yield?" Prince Aldrich asked Sir Gareth softly. The defeated champion looked up at his opponent with a mixture of respect and amazement. "I yield," he said clearly. His voice carrying across the silent courtyard, Prince Aldrich immediately stepped back and helped Sir Gareth to his feet. Showing the same respect he had demonstrated throughout their encounter, the crowd remained frozen. In shock, unable to believe what they had just witnessed, Queen Lysandra sat motionless on her throne, her face pale with disbelief. The impossible had happened. Her perfect plan had crumbled, and now she would have to face the consequences of her own overconfidence. The prince who had seemed so ordinary had just accomplished something no one else had ever done. As Prince Aldrich approached her throne, the queen realized that her attempt to humiliate him had backfired completely. she would have to honor. Her agreement, and grant him whatever reasonable request he might make. Her heart pounded as she wondered what price she would pay for underestimating the quiet prince from Thornwick. The silence in the courtyard felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Queen Lysandra sat frozen on her throne, her mind struggling to accept what had just happened. Her champion, the man who had never lost a single fight, was standing. Beside his opponent, with dirt on his armor and defeat in his eyes, Prince Aldrich walked slowly toward the throne, his sword now back in its sheath. His steps were calm and measured, showing no signs of the exhaustion that should have followed such an intense battle. The crowd parted before him, still too shocked to make any sound. Some nobles covered their mouths in amazement, while others simply stared with wide eyes. The queen's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She had been so confident, so absolutely certain that her plan would work perfectly. Now she was trapped by her own words, forced to honor an agreement she had never imagined she would have to keep. As Prince Aldrich approached the base of the platform where her throne sat, he stopped and looked up at her with those same steady eyes that had unsettled her from the beginning. There was no mockery in his expression, no cruel smile of victory. Instead, he looked almost understanding. "Your Majesty," he said in a voice that carried clearly across the silent courtyard. "According to our agreement, I have the right to make one reasonable request." The queen's mouth felt dry as dust. She wanted to speak, to say something that would restore her dignity and authority, but the words wouldn't come. Around her, the courtiers and advisors who usually hung on her every word were now staring at her with expressions she had never seen before. Some looked worried, others seemed curious, and a few appeared almost excited by this unexpected turn of events. "Yes," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, clearing her throat, she spoke louder. "You won the combat fairly. State your request." Prince Aldrich took a deep breath and looked directly into her eyes. What he said next would echo through the kingdom for years to come. "Your Majesty, I request your hand in marriage." The words hit the courtyard like a physical blow. Several nobles gasped so loudly that the sound seemed to bounce off the castle walls. One elderly advisor actually swayed on his feet as if he might faint. A young lady-in-waiting dropped the flowers she had been holding, and they scattered across the stone floor in a burst of pink and white petals. Queen Lysandra felt as though the world had tilted sideways. Of all the requests she had imagined he might make, this was the one possibility that had never entered her mind. Gold, land, trade, agreements, even a formal apology, these were the things she had prepared herself to grant. But marriage? To her? "What did you say?" she asked, hoping desperately that she had misheard. "I said I'd request your hand in marriage, Your Majesty," Prince Aldrich repeated, his voice steady and clear. "I believe this is a reasonable request between two royal houses." The queen's face went through several different expressions in the span of a few seconds. First shock, then disbelief, then growing anger as the full meaning of his words sank in. She stood up from her throne so quickly that her crown nearly slipped from her head. "You cannot be serious," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I am Queen Lysandra of Valdris. I rule this kingdom absolutely. I choose whom I marry, if I choose to marry at all. You cannot simply demand that I become your wife like some prize to be won in a contest." Prince Aldrich remained calm, despite her outburst. "Your Majesty, I understand your surprise, but the terms of our agreement were clear. You stated that if I won the combat, you would grant me any reasonable request. Marriage alliances between royal houses are not only reasonable, but have been common practice for centuries. They strengthen bonds between kingdoms and ensure peace between neighbors." The Queen's advisor, Lord Chancellor Bertram, stepped forward nervously. He was an older man who had served the royal family for decades, and he had never seen anything like this situation.
"Your Majesty,"
he said quietly, technically, "the prince is correct." The terms were clearly stated before witnesses. Silence. The Queen snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. "I will not be lectured about my own agreements." But even as she spoke, she knew that Lord Bertram was right. She had made the terms public, declaring them before her entire court. To refuse now would be to break her word in front of everyone who mattered in her kingdom. Her authority, already shaken by Sir Gareth's defeat, would be completely destroyed. If she went back on her promise, Prince Aldrich seemed to understand her internal struggle. "Your Majesty," he said gently, "I am not asking you to love me. I am not demanding that you give up your crown or your power. I'm simply asking that you honor the agreement you made freely before your people." The queen looked around the courtyard, at all the faces staring back at her. She saw curiosity, excitement, and even some approval in the eyes of her subjects. Some of the younger nobles were whispering among themselves, and she caught fragments of their conversations. "A marriage alliance with Thornwick would be excellent for trade, ... He seems like an honorable man. The queen has been alone for so long, ... The whispers made her realize something that scared her even more than the prince's request. Some of her people actually seemed to like this idea. They weren't horrified by the thought of their queen being forced into marriage. They were intrigued by the possibility of a royal wedding and the benefits it might bring. "I need time to consider this," she said, trying to regain some control. "Over the situation? Of course, Your Majesty," Prince Aldrich replied with a slight bow. "I would not expect an immediate answer to such an important question. Perhaps we could discuss the details privately?" The queen felt trapped from every direction. She refused outright. She would be breaking her word publicly, which would destroy her credibility as a ruler. If she agreed, she would be giving up the independence she had fought so hard to maintain. And if she tried to delay too long, she would appear weak and indecisive. She looked at Prince Aldrich again, studying his face for any sign of triumph or mockery. Instead, she saw something that confused her even more. He actually looked nervous. This confident prince who had just defeated her champion and made an impossible demand was now showing signs of uncertainty, as if he genuinely cared about her answer. "Very well," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "We will discuss this matter privately, but I want you to understand that agreeing to discuss it is not the same as agreeing to your request." Prince Aldrich smiled. "For the first time since the combat had ended, I understand completely, Your Majesty. I am grateful for your consideration." As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excited conversation about what they had just witnessed, Queen Lysandra remained standing beside her throne. She had started this day believing she would teach an arrogant prince a lesson about respecting her authority. Instead, she had learned that her own pride and overconfidence could be turned against her in ways she had never imagined. The most troubling part was that she found herself genuinely curious about what Prince Aldrich would say when they spoke privately. The first time in her life, Queen Lysandra realized that she might not be in complete control of her own destiny. 3 weeks after the shocking proposal, Queen Lysandra found herself standing in the castle's great chapel, wearing a wedding dress she had never wanted to put on. The ceremony had been arranged quickly, partly because she wanted to get it over with, and partly because the neighboring kingdoms had already heard about the unusual marriage arrangement and were sending representatives to witness it. The dress was beautiful, made of white silk with delicate silver embroidery, but it felt like a costume to the queen. She had always imagined that if she ever married, it would be her choice, her decision, made for love, or at least for political advantage, that she had chosen herself. Instead, here she was, bound by her own words and her sense of honor to marry a man she barely knew. Prince Aldrich stood at the altar waiting for her, dressed in the formal clothing of Thornwick royalty. He looked handsome and dignified, but the queen felt no joy at the sight of him. During their private conversations over the past weeks, he had been respectful and reasonable, but she still felt like a bird being forced into a cage. Even if it was a golden one, the ceremony itself was formal and cold. When the priest asked if she took Prince Aldrich to be her husband, Queen Lysandra's "I do" sounded more like a business agreement than a declaration of love. Prince Aldrich's response was warmer, but even he seemed to understand that this was not a traditional romantic wedding. After the ceremony, there was a feast, but the queen barely tasted her food. She smiled when appropriate and spoke to the guests, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about how different her life would be now that she was married. Would Prince Aldrich try to take control of her kingdom? Would he expect her to change her ways to please him? The biggest surprise came on their wedding night. Instead of expecting to share the royal chambers, Prince Aldrich politely asked for separate quarters. "Your Majesty," he said, "I understand that this marriage was not your choice. I will not impose myself on you any more than our agreement requires. I hope that perhaps in time we might become friends, but I will not demand more than that." Queen Lysandra was shocked by his consideration. She had expected him to act like most men in his position would, demanding his rights as a husband. Instead, he was giving her space and time to adjust to their new situation. It was the first sign that Prince Aldrich might be different from what she had assumed. Over the following days, the new prince consort settled into castle life quietly. He didn't try to take over any of the queen's duties or make demands about how things should be run. Instead, he observed and learned, asking questions about the kingdom's customs and laws. When he did speak up during court meetings, his suggestions were thoughtful and helpful. The first time Queen Lysandra really paid attention to his ideas was during a discussion about trade routes. The kingdom's merchants had been complaining about bandits attacking their caravans on the main road to the eastern territories. The queen's advisors suggested sending more guards, which would be expensive and might not solve the problem. Prince Aldrich listened carefully to the discussion before speaking. "Your Majesty, in Thornwick, we faced a similar problem a few years ago. We found that instead of just adding more guards, it was more effective to work with the local villages along the route. We helped them improve their own defenses and gave them a small payment for reporting bandit activity. The villagers became our eyes and ears, and the bandits found it much harder to hide." The queen considered his suggestion, made sense, and it would cost less than hiring additional guards. "How exactly did you organize this system?" she asked. Prince Aldrich explained the details, and within a month, the bandit attacks had decreased significantly. The queen found herself genuinely impressed by his practical approach to problem solving. It was the first time she had seen him as more than just an unwanted husband. The second incident that changed her opinion happened during a border dispute with a neighboring lord. The lord claimed that some of the queen's farmers were grazing their cattle on his land, and he was threatening to take the matter to the regional council. The queen's first instinct was to respond with force, showing this minor lord that he couldn't challenge her authority. But Prince Aldrich suggested a different approach. "Your Majesty, what if we invited this lord to visit the castle? Sometimes, these disputes arise from misunderstandings. And a face-to-face conversation might resolve things more peacefully than threats." The queen was skeptical, but she agreed to try. When the lord arrived, Prince Aldrich treated him with respect and listened carefully to his concerns. It turned out that the problem wasn't really about cattle grazing the lord was worried about. His farmers' water rights during the dry season. In a few hours, they had worked out an agreement that satisfied everyone. Watching Prince Aldrich handle the situation, Queen Lysandra realized that he had a gift for understanding what people really needed, not just what they said they wanted. He didn't try to dominate or intimidate. Instead, he listened and found solutions that made everyone feel heard and respected as weeks turned into months. The queen began to notice other things about her husband. He was kind to the servants, remembering their names and asking about their families. He spent time in the castle's library reading about Valdris's history and culture. He even learned some of the local customs that weren't written down anywhere, showing genuine interest in becoming part of the kingdom. Most surprisingly, Prince Aldrich never tried to take credit for his successful suggestions. When the bandit problem was solved, he made sure everyone knew it was the queen's decision to implement the new system. When the border dispute was resolved, he praised the queen's wisdom in choosing negotiation over conflict. The queen found herself looking forward to their conversations during the evening meals they had started sharing. Prince Aldrich would tell her stories about Thornwick, and she would share her thoughts about governing Valdris. He had opinions and ideas, but he never made her feel like he thought she was wrong or foolish. One evening, as they walked through the castle gardens after dinner, Queen Lysandra asked him a question that had been troubling her. "Prince Aldrich, why did you really request marriage as your reward? You could have asked for gold, land, or trade agreements. Why choose something that would tie you to a woman who didn't want to marry you?" Prince Aldrich was quiet for a long moment before answering. Your Majesty, from the moment I arrived in your kingdom, I saw something in you that I had never seen before. You were strong, intelligent, and completely unafraid to speak your mind. But I also saw that you were lonely, surrounded by people who agreed with you because they had to, not because they wanted to. The Queen felt her heart skip a beat. No one had ever seen her loneliness before, or at least no one had ever mentioned it. I thought, Prince Aldrich continued, that perhaps we could be good partners. Not just in marriage, but in ruling. I've seen how much you care about your people, and I hoped that together we might be able to do even more good for both our kingdoms. For the first time since their wedding, Queen Lysandra smiled at her husband without forcing it.
Maybe she
Thought this unwanted marriage might turn into something she had never expected to find. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and Queen Lysandra barely recognized the woman she had become. The angry, prideful ruler who had once demanded that everyone bow before her had slowly transformed into someone who actually listened to other people's ideas. The change hadn't happened overnight, but rather through countless small moments and conversations with the man she had been forced to marry. It was a crisp autumn evening when everything finally came together. The Queen and Prince Aldrich were walking through the castle gardens, as had become their custom after dinner. The leaves were turning golden and red, and the air smelled of wood smoke from the village chimneys. They had been discussing plans for the upcoming harvest festival when Prince Aldrich suddenly stopped walking. Your Majesty, he said, his voice softer than usual, may I ask you something personal? The Queen felt her heart flutter slightly. Over the months, she had grown to enjoy these conversations more than she cared to admit. Of course, what would you like to know? Why were you so angry when I first arrived? I mean, I understand that. I challenged your authority, but it seemed like something deeper than that. Queen Lysandra was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer. 6 months ago, she would have been furious at such a personal question. Now she found herself wanting to be honest with him. I think, she said slowly, it was because you treated me like a real person instead of just a queen. Everyone else in my life has always told me what they thought I wanted to hear. My advisors, my courtiers, even my servants, they all acted like I was perfect and could do no wrong. But you questioned my ideas and suggested improvements, and that terrified me. Prince Aldrich nodded thoughtfully. I can understand that. But why did it terrify you? Shouldn't a good ruler want honest advice? Because, the Queen said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. If I wasn't perfect, then maybe I didn't deserve to be queen. My father died when I was young, and I had to prove myself constantly to keep my throne. I thought that showing any weakness or admitting any mistakes would give my enemies a reason to overthrow me. They had reached a stone bench beside a fountain, and Prince Aldrich gestured for her to sit down. May I tell you what I saw when I first met you? The Queen nodded, curious despite herself. I saw someone who was incredibly strong and intelligent, but who was carrying the weight of an entire kingdom on her shoulders. I saw someone who cared so much about her people that she was afraid to show any vulnerability, even to herself. And I saw someone who had been alone for so long that she had forgotten how good it could feel to have a true partner. The Queen felt tears prick at her eyes. Is that really what you saw? Or are you just trying to make me feel better? Prince Aldrich reached over and gently took her hand. Your Majesty, Lysandra, I have never lied to you, and I won't start now. Exactly what I saw, and it's why I asked for your hand in marriage. I didn't want to conquer you or control your kingdom. I wanted to stand beside you and help carry that weight. For the first time in months, Queen Lysandra allowed herself to really look at her husband. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the patient way he listened when she spoke, and the genuine warmth in his voice when he said her name. Somewhere along the way, without her even realizing it, she had stopped thinking of him as an unwanted burden and started thinking of him as ... Well, as someone she cared about. I have a confession to make, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been looking forward to our evening walks more than any other part of my day. At first I told myself It was just because you gave good advice about kingdom matters. That's not the whole truth." Prince Aldrich squeezed her hand gently. "What is the whole truth?" "The whole truth is that you make me feel like I can be myself instead of just being a queen. When I'm with you, I don't have to pretend to be perfect or have all the answers. I can just be me." Prince Aldrich smiled. And this time it was different from his usual polite expression. This smile reached his eyes and seemed to light up his entire face. "Lysandra, you don't know how long I've been hoping to hear you say something like that." "Really? But I've been so difficult, so stubborn about accepting this marriage. You've been protecting yourself," Prince Aldrich said gently. "I understood that from the beginning. I knew that earning your trust would take time, and I was willing to wait as long as necessary." The queen felt something warm spreading through her chest, a feeling she had never experienced before. "Aldrich," she said, using his first name for the first time since their wedding, "I think I'm falling in love with you." Prince Aldrich's eyes widened with surprise and joy. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated," I'm sure she said, laughing at his concern. "Trust me, after all these months of fighting against this marriage, I think I would know if I was just feeling obligated. This is something completely different." Prince Aldrich stood up and gently pulled her to her feet. "Then may I kiss my wife properly for the first time?" Queen Lysandra smiled and nodded, and when their lips met, she felt like she was discovering something entirely new about what it meant to be happy. The kiss was gentle and sweet, nothing like the formal peck they had shared at their wedding ceremony. When they separated, both were smiling. "So what happens now?" the queen asked. "Now," Prince Aldrich said, "we continue building something beautiful together. We rule your kingdom as partners. We support each other through difficult times, and we see what kind of life we can create together." Over the following months, the kingdom of Valdris flourished under their joint leadership. The queen's strength and determination, combined with Prince Aldrich's wisdom and diplomacy, created a style of governing that was both effective and compassionate. They made decisions together, each bringing their own strengths to every challenge they faced. The people of Valdris noticed the change in their queen. She seemed happier, more relaxed, and more willing to listen to different viewpoints. The court became a place where ideas were discussed and debated, rather than simply approved without. Question trade with Thornwick increased dramatically, benefiting both kingdoms. The alliance between the two royal houses brought peace and prosperity to the entire region. What had started as a forced marriage had become a partnership that strengthened both rulers and both kingdoms. Most importantly, Queen Lysandra had learned that true strength didn't come from never showing weakness or admitting mistakes. Real strength came from being vulnerable enough to trust another person, wise enough to listen to good advice, and brave enough to change when change was needed. On quiet evenings, as they walked through their gardens or sat by the fire discussing the day's events, Queen Lysandra often reflected on how different her life had become. The punishment she had feared most had turned out to be the greatest gift she had ever received. She had gained not just a husband, but a true partner, a best friend, and a love that made every day brighter. Prince Aldrich had been right from the beginning. Together, they were so much stronger than either of them had been alone. And in the end, love had won the greatest victory of all.